Welcome to AFI Fest 2020, presented by Audi. I'm Susan Ruskin, the Executive Vice President of AFI and the Dean of the Conservatory. So before we begin, I'd like to thank our festival sponsors, our presenting sponsor Audi, our AFI members, as well as you, our audience. We're here today with Don Hardy, Sean Penn, and Anne Lee from the film CITIZEN PENN, which is a documentary that shows us how this phenomenal volunteer program, CORE, was built from one man's frustration combined with his willingness to step up and put boots on the ground to help people in an emergency. Community organized relief effort. CORE at its essence works within and with the people of a community to solve immediate needs and build sustainable programs to last well beyond the emergency relief. So with me today to talk about CITIZEN PENN is the director of the film, Don Hardy. Don is an award-winning documentary filmmaker who has tackled subjects such as training service dogs, the anonymous performance group called The Residents, turning loss to love, and the abuse of power in a child molestation case, among many others. He and Mr. Penn have actually worked together before the making of CITIZEN PENN. Anne Lee, the co-founder of CORE, the organization which evolved from Penn's JPHRO, which was founded in 2010, geared towards the reconstruction and relief efforts in Haiti. Ms. Lee has served as CEO of the organization since 2016, and she has overseen the organization's successful transition into an international response and resilience building NGO that serves many communities around the world, including the exemplary work CORE has been doing providing free testing for the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just have to say here that AFI Conservatory and myself in particular have really benefited from the work and expertise that CORE has shared with us as we're all just trying to figure out how to keep everyone safe, get back into productions, keep our students safe during this pandemic. So I just want to thank you all for that. Also with us is Sean Penn, and we all know Sean Penn's work as an actor and a director and a producer in his 40-year career. But it's not because of the 5 times he was nominated for an Academy Award or the 2 times he won Film Milk and Mystic River that we are here. It is the Commander's Award for Service, the 82nd Airborne Award, the 1st Recon 73rd Division Coin of Excellence, Commendation of Excellence from the United States Southern Command, the 2010 Hollywood Humanitarian Award from the Hollywood Film Festival, the 2011 Stanley Kramer Award from the Producers Guild of America, and the Children's and Families Global Development Fund Humanitarian Award. Also in July 2010, Penn was knighted by Haitian President René Préval in a ceremony in Port-au-Prince. This, among many other accolades from his humanitarian work, is the reason we are here to talk about CITIZEN PENN. So welcome to you all, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So Don, I'm going to start with you because a film like this is actually really hard to make well. It's a film that's made, this subject matter made fairly often, but rarely is as effective as this, I felt this documentary was. So I want to just ask you, the question is, at what point in this journey did you realize you had to tell the story, and how did it come about?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It's, you know, this film, it goes back to 2010, and when the earthquake in Haiti happened, and I happened to be with Shawn that day, or not long after, talking about another project, and he was distracted that day because he was trying to arrange for a flight to go into Haiti with aid. And at that moment, I said, I really wanted to be able to say, I want to go with you. I want to go film this. But I couldn't because we were finishing this other film. And so not long after he arrived there, I saw him on CNN talking about what was going on. And I spoke with his assistant and said, does he need somebody there to shoot some footage? Thinking that we could share it with the news outlets. And not long after that, I was on the ground in Haiti doing just that. And it was almost right away, I knew that there was something special happening and it needed to be documented, and you know, the immediate need was to get footage to the news outlets, but there was something more there, and knew it right away. And it took and then just kept kind of filming and developing the story to see where it would go. And it's kind of crazy. We're now 10 years out from that earthquake, and we have a film that documents that decade.
I actually love the setup of Captain Barry Frischman. Is the only one that captured footage, because I think that really worked well, because it got you into the whole sense of being there with everyone.
Yeah.
If we set the stage just really, really fast, so January 2010, magnitude 7.0 earthquake, lasts for about 30 seconds, but over 220,000 people are killed, 1.5 million are homeless, 300,000 of them are injured. And Shawn, you go down there with 30 volunteers, 7 of them doctors, no exit plan. You're living in tents in the largest camp in Port-au-Prince, and you've got 350,000 vials of morphine and a stockpile of water purifiers. When did you go from that urge to just get boots on the ground and go help to kind of realizing that there was something much bigger, this NGO that was developing that became core? Was it early or later?
Yeah, I mean, the initial plan in summary was to be there for about 2 weeks and to push the doctors that we were able to collect in support of what we were doing, in support of the Haitian people, and push them out to existing medical organizations, trauma clinics, and hospitals. And in the meantime, take the resources we had and get some trucks and push out these intravenous pain medications. So it looked like about a 2-week plan to get 350,000 vials where they needed to be. In that period of time, because we had become, after about 3 days camping in the yard of a broken house, we'd followed the track of helicopters, US military helicopters going overhead, and discovered that very close to where we'd spent those first couple of nights, there was what became the biggest IDP camp in Port-au-Prince. So we then soon embedded there alongside the 82nd Airborne, who had come in along with, I think there were 22,000 US troops brought over, and administering to all the camps we could reach, but in particular, of course, where we were, because day by day, our volunteers were creating relationships with these people who had just been displaced. And because we were not a standardized NGO, we were a ragtag group, we also had no curfew. Most of the NGOs, for liability reasons, security reasons, have curfews. So we were working the nights throughout the night as well as the days, and by doing that, we would see what would happen when the torrential rain came, because mostly it came at night, and the hardship and danger that created in a camp that was unlit and at great risk to flood and mudslide. I think by our presence there and bringing light in, by creating a tent hospital, a trust was being built in those first 2 weeks. And out of that, young Haitians from the camp began coming to where we were encamped adjacent to them, saying, "You're helping our country. We want to help you help our country." And bit by bit, we saw, what started as 30 mostly white Americans turn into 100 Haitian strong organization, and at the same time, there was the experience of working in film, where we always need the set completed yesterday, and emergency relief seemed to be more subject to bureaucracy than even a studio film. And that was frustrating. And it was out of seeing that, and out of seeing many of the great name brand NGOs at work and their extraordinary dysfunction, that it became very much not a question of that we were so fit for the job, but that they weren't. And there was a kind of confidence that we and our newly joined Haitian counterparts built a confidence together that we could make a positive impact.
And it's interesting because I've been feeling that sense of, making movies really prepares you for emergencies because we're so accustomed, like going into another country, building something from scratch, creating a world, working with the people who are there locally. And as I was watching the film, it was reaffirming that, as I've been feeling it intensely with this pandemic. There's nobody coming in to figure this out for us. We got to do it ourselves, and we do it every day when we make movies. So it felt, that's I think one of the reasons why the movie was so effective for me, because it felt organic, like what you were doing and how you showed the growth of the organization felt entirely organic and completely right, especially with bringing in the Haitian population, especially, you know, having the Haitian doctors there. And when the army left, when you took over their tent, I thought that was a great scene. It was exceptionally well done. It's, you know, it felt to me like, oh yeah, wait a minute. It makes sense that Sean Penn is, as long as you stayed. So how long did you stay that first go round?
9 months.
That's what I thought. So it, you know, it's the people that come and go that end up not delivering. But if you stick there and then, but the organization stayed for much longer, correct? You went back for the hurricane too.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, something important that I see in you know, for example, with Don's work in general. One of the other things, it was really one of my, for certainly in a disaster zone, I had some short visits myself in conflict zones, but this was very different. And when journalists would come in, typically their stays were about 3 days. And I would see the reporting, and it's not enough time to get a piece, the picture. And so what happens is that if they're conservative journalists, they come in with one predisposition, and they have generic points of contact that are, you know, brokered through the same usual suspect minders, and same on the left. And so we saw unproductive journalism across the board in that. And I think that, you know, when it comes to something like this, what Don's captured with the kind of accidental creation of an NGO in a place, and one that might otherwise have become, you know, another American NGO. But because we were, I guess goes back to the film reference, casting the best actors that we could find, it turned out that the people who could play the real territory were Haitian.
And that's now become the basic ethos for what CORE's become too, which is listen to the community and engage the community. Don't come in and think you're gonna take care of things and leave. So Don, did you stay the whole time, the first 9 months for the whole thing?
No, I believe my first trip was about 3 weeks, and then I was back a couple months later as the rubble removal process really started. And capturing, yeah, as you said, the growth was so, you know, Shawn and his team listening to the community and doing what they thought needed to be done, you know, listening to them. And so then I would just show up to document that, and just kept providing what I could to the news outlets, then salting the rest away, and every now and then bringing up to Shawn, you know, maybe it would be time to try to do a documentary on this. And then it would have been one film 1 year after the earthquake. It would have been a different one 5 years after. But now we have this decade and this very unique ability to look back and see what worked, what didn't. And I really credit Shawn and Ann for letting me tell that story of the good and the bad, and yeah, letting me follow it where it went.
Well, it was interesting because the camp relocation, the first one, and then the rubble removal, which led to everybody moving back, and then your shots afterwards of what those places have become, which is so profound. I mean, it tells the story really, really well.
One thing on that, you know, often I think with Haiti, and probably with so many other situations where there's a big public push to donate to something, you often hear then get caught up in the where did the money go conversation. And that's not, you know, that has its valid questions, but when you do see the progress and you can see it there and you can tell that story too, that should also be part of what journalists want to talk about.
Yeah, if they have to stay long enough to figure that out though, right?
Yeah.
So Anne, all of your field experience, you lived in Haiti before this too, and before the earthquake, and the Philippines, and Kosovo, in the Congo, which some pretty hot spots in the world. At what point did you come in, and how has this changed your trajectory and what you've been doing, and how have you affected CORE?
Yeah, so it was in 2010 after the earthquake when Shawn and I sort of crossed paths, and the US government asked some NGOs to come and talk through some of the issues that Shawn at the time was dealing with managing that camp. And I have to say, you know, it was not, I probably wasn't the friendliest person that Shawn has ever met at that point, given that point in time. I was very, very sort of reluctant to engage in something that was like sort of, shiny and had a lot of visibility around it, but quickly came to realize that, Shawn, not just Shawn, but the team was so incredibly fresh and new. And although he had, some people who had also been in emergencies, I think it's really Shawn's perspective that stood out. And it was kind of addressing things that sometimes when you're in the same sector, in the same space, and stuck in those grooves of working in a certain way, that you don't stop to think, to be like, why are we doing it this way? Is this the best way to do it? And having that outsider perspective and just Shawn's personality of being like, why are we doing this? Let's cut from A to C and go through this way. That, just was shocking. And he did ruffle a lot of feathers, and although he was, at the time pushing the envelope so hard to do things differently, there was also such an approach of like humility of like, I'm also trying to learn this space, that I think that unique combination really brought a freshness to the way that we should be doing emergencies and should be responding to disasters. And it's really that ethos that I think that I've tried to be true to as the CEO of the organization, to carry on, because I think that, again, our organization is really hard to explain to the average person, because it's like, what do you do? Generally, you have these organizations that are like, we do water, we do food, we do housing, we do X, Y, or Z. But as you were saying, and you noted, our organization is very careful about, there's things that we're very good at, like rubble removal, shelter, and all kinds of stuff. But for us, what we do is basically listen to the community and really figure out what is it that they need and how do they want to rebuild and strengthen their communities against this disaster, but also against future disasters. So for us, that freshness to it is, strangely enough, in the humanitarian sector, is not normal. You just don't find funding that way. It's hard to explain. It's hard to get behind, but that is the right way to do it, in my opinion, and the most effective way to do it. And so I think it was that real freshness and approach and ethos that he brought that doesn't exist still, that changed it for me.
Yeah, and by the way, great name change. I actually thought was very meaningful. It kind of brought everything together, and it took me to personally a minute to figure out that CORE was what it was originally was the organization from Haiti, but it was also some of your volunteers. We had one of your volunteers, Chris Kringle, who's an AD, had done a session for us, and she's so wonderful. And I started talking to her and John, and Riff came up and looked at our spaces. Your volunteers are so engaged. They are so passionate about the mission and the message. And I think it's going to be, I'm going to really watch as you grow, because this is no question this will grow into a bigger and bigger NGO, to keep it from becoming too bureaucratic, to keep it from losing those roots, and I'm curious as to how you decided to get into COVID-19 and the testing, because we are ever so grateful to you. And I have felt like exactly the same as you described. You get in the plane and you build it as you're going along. We all feel that way now. And I think places like CORE, at least from my personal experience with dealing with your volunteers, have helped us to see the cavalry is not coming in. We got to figure it out ourselves. It's up to us. And I think that's an essential message to get across. So curious to see how did it go? How did you get involved in the pandemic and testing?
Yeah, I think like with many things that have happened, I'll say that one of the things, because Anne had become a significant mentor in all the things that did work and a lot of lessons were learned, and was kind of a stallion trapped in a shoebox with some of the bureaucratic organizations she had worked with. So I would say that it was less a growing fondness for me or the way that I thought about things, than it was trusting that the familiar was familiar. And so when it came to COVID, like many things now, and she had been pushing hard for us to not necessarily immediately broadly internationalize, but spread the wings of skill sets that our teams had acquired. And in that and building time, it moved from the old organization name into core, and really did come as a co-creation. And with COVID, again, a kind of co-creation where we had as an organization had the experience of the cholera epidemic in Haiti. So this was a little touchstone with infectious disease. And we recognized that as we had started working in the hurricane belt, we had been working very hard towards prevention mechanisms, that when we come as Americans in our own country into COVID and we have a disaster relief organization, the infrastructure under our feet, it's a kind of look at each other like, you see the news? Yeah, I saw the news. Okay, next move. We called the governor of California and met him down when the Mercy was coming in, and Governor Newsom met with us and guided us. We didn't know what our place would be in it. We just knew we wanted to volunteer to help. How do we help? And so he got us to the Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles, who had already implemented COVID testing programs with the Los Angeles Fire Department. And the first thing that we were able to do was to absorb those sites and let those firefighters get back to their job. And out of that, it became a genuine partnership in the evolution of the how-to kit of various testing methods, from the catch-all sites to the mobiles, and it's an ever-evolving program. And as we know, the tests themselves are now evolving. So this is a daily renewal.
But the volunteer organization there from the community, same thing. You know, now it's not Haiti, it's in our backyard. And the training that you were doing in the South for the hurricane, it's the same kind of message, that ultimately the community and the youth of the community are coming together.
It was part of the same thing that we did early on in transitioning in the Haitian organization, was to transition out volunteers and create jobs for local staff. And it's the same thing that we've done here. And that's in part, you know, in Haiti, of course, it's because jobs are hard enough to come by. And here, as that is also the case, we had a lot of people who had just lost jobs. And so it becomes a kind of financial stimulus at the same time as it is a participation in the community. And I think it's the morale of our teams, the enthusiasm, what you described about how committed they are, really comes out of that they are the front line of testing for their community. And they rightly know that how important that is. And I think take a lot of pride in it.
And also even some of the people in taking some leadership roles, that are volunteer leadership roles, they're coming from other fields. They just want to help. I mean, that sense of like, we're just here to do whatever we can, I think is built in. Or is
a lot from the film industry, actually.
Yeah, I know. Many
right.
people that I know, so that's how I got to you guys in the first place. And, you know, have been thinking about how all of us come together to figure this out, not each individual institution, nonprofit or for-profit, try and do it alone. Like the best way to do it is for us to sort of pool our resources. So all those people who sometimes thought they were in competition with us are now our friends trying to figure this all out together. And I get these emails like, would it be okay if I could talk to you about what you're doing with COVID? I'm like, of course, like that's what we're here for. So I'm going to ask this question only because again, it was another moment that struck me. You opened the documentary, which was something that obviously Shawn hates the most, begging people in black tie for money. But there was something about it that really hit me, where you pointed out at one point that there are 300 people in the room. If you make 6 million in a night, it's maybe coming out of 5 pockets. It kills me. I've been to so many of these events and it destroys me every time because I know whose those pockets are most of the time. Is this the way that we're going to keep funding things like this, or is there a better way for us to, you know, figure this out? And I know those galas are really important. We count on them too. How do we get people to understand that it doesn't matter if it's $5 or $50 or $100. If you're in that room, put up something.
This is a big cultural question. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we lack in the United States is mandatory service. With mandatory service, young people have come to know quickly, as many of the young people who have selected to serve in the COVID response do know, that it becomes part of your cellular existence, that one person can make a difference, that they matter. And I don't think that leaves them. And those sort of people typically are the ones who then, when they come into great wealth, continue to participate and support these kinds of things. But in a capitalist society, people create sort of systemic protections from that which will lighten their own wallet, and justifications. And it has to be broken. And I think the only way it's broken is probably by a devastation. And I think that we are in a devastation, and we certainly, you know, the cold hard terms to it. Yes, there are many new approaches in fundraising, and we're of course assessing all of those all the time. But the old pass the hat around is still going to be a very important part of this. And it's I think the best thing that, you know, our job in that, and I think it's a job we can do better at all the time, is informing people of what it is that their money does. And so I think that's the part of it that we take on in our accountability to the 5 out of 300. I think we can always do a better job in getting people informed, so that they, like the young people who serve, and understand they can make a difference, so that those people who write a check understand they're making a real difference.
I'm assuming they know. I think we've got to get into our culture and teach this, you know, the generations coming up, that anything matters. Doesn't matter how much it is, and it's not a barter. You give me this and I'll give you that. It's doing it for the sake of doing it. And I think that's, you know, I'm hoping that if there's any silver lining that comes out of a pandemic like this, is that we realize we're only as good as we are as a community and working together. So I'd like to see that ethos that you've developed at CORE actually spreads well beyond that. Because we, as citizens, we do have to stand up, which is a good title, by the way.
The reason for the title is something that Shawn says near the end of the film about our need for citizen participation and citizen activists. And we are really seeing that now. And I hope that, you know, although this is definitely a story about Shawn and the team that went into Haiti and the development, I hope that people can see something in it that also encourages them to get involved in whatever way they can. And maybe they don't have the contact list or, you know, relative bank account of Shawn and CORE, but you can find a way to get involved, just like we're seeing with the volunteers for CORE now, or Black Lives Matter, or whatever it might be. You have to engage in this world and find a way to get involved.
We all know in every disaster, it's not these external folk that come in that save the most lives within the first 24 to 48 hours. It's your family, your friends, and your neighbors that really save the majority of lives immediately in all the disasters. So just knowing that and know the impact that you can make, and that it's happening, that you can just do it immediately in your own surroundings, should kind of help drive that culture, or that impetus to want to do something. It starts with your own home.
100% agree. That's why, even though it was just the end credits with you showing what's happening in the pandemic and COVID and what CORE is doing now, it felt like, hey, get the message. This will live on if we take what we've learned from what happened in Haiti and apply it elsewhere. I actually want to say thank you, because we're coming up on time, but unless there's something else, but this, I really think it is a call to action, and not just about stepping in for emergency relief after an earthquake or a hurricane, but much more of a call to action for people to to pay attention to what's happening in your neighborhood and your backyard and your community and help each other out. So I really appreciate the movie and what it did and what it had to say. So unless there's something to add, I just want to thank everybody for watching, and we'd love to hear from you on social media at #AFIFest, and join us for more great films and virtual events at fest.afi.com. Thank you very much to all of you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.